All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our webinar today. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Dr. Jasmine Muszik, and I am the Data Engagement Coordinator at the Rural Ontario Institute. I'm joined today by Paul Steenhof of the CSA Group, but before we jump into the webinar, I would like to first acknowledge that we're presenting today from the traditional lands of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe Nation, which have lived on and contributed to this territory for millennia. Their culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land, and we want to honor, recognize, and respect Indigenous peoples as the traditional stewards in the lands in which we share today. All right, I'll pass it off to Paul to introduce himself and present on his organization's work on the rural well-being standards. For those in attendance, feel free to put any questions or comments in the chat during our presentations, and now I'll pass it off to Paul.
Hello, everyone. My name is Paul Steenhof. I'm with CSA Group. I'm the Strategic Initiatives Manager for the Environment and Business Excellence sector. So I will be presenting today. Jasmine, I can share the screen now. Is that fine?
Yep, go ahead.
It's be there. You see it?
It's just loading. There we go. We can see your slides.
Awesome. So yes, today I want to give a bit of the background context for this National Standard of Canada. It was developed really in a multi-year project that resulted in the publication in 2022. So I just today in today's presentation, I want to really give you a sense of context for what we did. But before I do so, I'll just give you a bit of background and information on the CSA Group for those who might not be fully aware of us. And I wanted to give a standard 101, just quick, overview of kind of the process that we went through, so people can get a sense of what goes into a standards development process, and particularly with CSA R113. So I have a nice image of the published standards on the front page of that. Again, it's a National Standard of Canada published in 2022. At the end of the presentation, I really want to talk a bit more about the potential path forward in the sense of where the standard could be taken. So just a bit about CSA Group. CSA Group at a glance. We are organized into two components, if you will. So CSA Group is made up of a standards development organization, and then we have a commercial subsidiary. The SDO, Standards Development Organization, is a not-for-profit, and our commercial end is for-profit, but helps support the Standards Development Organization. So on the Standards Development Organization, we actually have multiple components. We have the standards development work under the standards development. Then we have a research arm that undertakes research that supports standards development. But then we have education and training that offers capacity building around published standards. And then we have an advocacy group that really supports things like public policy reports that are meant to be helping inform public policy from the standards lens. Again, a bit more about CSA. I think important to note, we are members driven, globally relevant. We are operating across the globe. We have 100+ years of experience in standards development. We have two 12-story broad areas of focus ranging from electrical, plumbing, construction, infrastructure, healthcare, environment, and business excellence, which I'm part of. Importantly, we have 11,000+ members that are actually contributing to the standards development process, and we have 3,000+ standards and over 1,000 committees. So just a bit about standards 101, as I call it, just to give you a sense of the standards development process. Some folks, might not know so much about standards. So what is a standard to start with? So standard really helps stipulate minimum requirements for the use, safety, performance, or design of a product, process, or service. So I do focus on minimal requirements, and but just a note too, a standard can include guidance. So guidance to help inform a product, process, or service. So it often includes both shells, if you will, requirement and should statements. Again, a standard is developed by a technical committee of experts that is working through an accredited consensus-based process that's accredited by the Standards Council of Canada, I should say. And it is consensus-based, which is important. We do operate on the standard is approved by the committee. So importantly, we do have a balanced stakeholder participation where we do not want one sector, if you will, to dominate. So we do have a balanced matrix, which is important when it comes to the standards development process. No one sector can dominate. So we do have follow our processes. Obviously, that's stringent to standards development. All standards are voluntary upon publication. So it's only when they're referenced in regulations where they may become mandatory from a regulatory perspective. And we also, we do advocate for their use by governments, by industry, etc. Just a quick snapshot, if you will, of the process. And the standards development process can take anywhere from 15 to 18 to 20 months. So it's a stepped process that starts with, really the initial statement of work or the notice of intent that is issued to the public to let people know that we are developing a standard. Then the standard will go through a committee process. Leading into that, we often use a subject matter expert to develop a C document for the standard. The committee process can last, 6 months, etc. In general, I should say. Then it goes into a 60-day public review. So the public has the opportunity to look at the standard and provide comments, and the technical committee has to go look at those comments and respond to them. Then we go through a process of approving the document through the committee, a voting process. And then CSA needs to undertake a step to do all the checks to make sure everything was followed. And then finally, it's edited and published. And to note too, also, CSA maintains all the standards that we publish. And we go on a cycle where we reaffirm a standard after 5 years. So again, I went through a bit of the process for standards, and now kind of getting into the heart of the standard. So again, it was published in 2022, but leading into that, we really started, I think, the process in around 2019. So a bit of context. And I think, not that I'm preaching to the choir per se, but I think this is, I think probably many people in the audience will recognize this context. And since rural areas face many unique challenges, which in some cases are unique compared to larger communities, but particularly when it comes down to how we assess it, because there's also a data challenge. But if you look at what's been major issues of economic trends, climate change, demographic changes, etc. So communities are facing a number of interacting factors and processes that are impacting them. But when it comes down to communities being able to assess their well-being, we also have a challenge of data. And so this is part of what the standard was trying to address, was in the sense of providing guidance and sources of data around indicators that could help measure the well-being of a rural community. So just to launch into the scope and intended application, maybe if I can also explain the scope of the standard is very specific and very important. It outlines what that standard covers, and it is it's written into the standard, obviously. So this particular standard provides definitions and methodologies for a set of indicators to identify and measure rural community well-being, prosperity, and sustainability. So the committee saw, possible applications of the standard. So staff and officials in rural and small town municipalities and organizations who work in related fields, government departments and agencies, and also researchers involved in rural community analysis. And I'd have to say too, that was the intended application, and I think it also reflected by the members on the technical committee itself. So just quickly to kind of highlight the indicators covered in the standard, but in the following presentation, I think a lot more depth is going to go into certain aspects of this, but we did cover 7 major categories: economic, environmental, health, housing, institutional, population, and social and cultural indicators. And then we drill down into really what the committee thought was important in terms of measurement and indicators around these different points. So again, the standard is meant to provide access, not provide access, but provide the data that can be used to analyze these various indicators. So I just want to talk quickly about I say potential path forward, because just to explain, again, 2022, the standard was published. 2027, we're up for reaffirmation. What does that mean? Well, the committee is now looking at the standard to say, to look at it from the point of view, how has it performed? Does it need to be updated? What are the weaknesses? What are the areas for advancement, etc.? So the committee has started to meet, the technical committee, and I can say that they met earlier in October, and they're looking now to collect feedback, within the TC of areas that the standard should be advanced, and this is going to inform a potential update of the standard. So the committee has come together again, and over the next couple of months is going to be collecting we are going to be collecting this feedback from the technical committee members, and using it to inform what a possible update of the standard could look like. And that would be a unique project that would be hopefully launched relatively quickly, so we can look towards a 2027 date. So that really brings me to the end of my presentation. I think we left time at the end of the webinar for questions, but I'd be happy to answer any questions. But again, I think it's more so at the end of the webinar.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Paul. And as you mentioned, if you have any questions, feel free to put those in the chat. We do have time at the end, and we'll go through and answer those. But I'll take over now, and we'll pass it back to my presentation. So give me a moment as I share. All right, can someone confirm that you're able to see my slides?
Yep, we can see them.
Perfect. Oh no, just give me a minute. My computer is slowing down. Okay, there we go. Hopefully I'm connected well and you can hear and see me. All right, so again, my name is Dr. Jasmine Muszik. I'm the Data Engagement Coordinator at the Rural Ontario Institute, and today I have the pleasure of presenting to you our Community Wellbeing Dashboard, which is a tool that we have developed to help users understand what's happening in their local community as well as across Ontario. So today I'll provide an overview of the dashboard. I'll go through a demonstration of its key features and functionality, and then I'll explain how it can be used to support community planning and analysis. So first I want to introduce the Rural Ontario Institute, also known as ROI. So ROI is a charitable organization that delivers community development initiatives, including leadership programs, and we also connect and engage rural communities through projects, events, workshops, and webinars just like this one. So ROI provides data evidence and analysis for decision makers and community stakeholders through our two data-driven tools, the Community Wellbeing Dashboard and the Rural Housing Information System, also known as the RHIS. Though today's presentation is going to focus on our newly launched Wellbeing Dashboard, I also highly encourage you to check out the RHIS on our website, and I will point out where that is, as its purpose is to engage municipalities, developers, and home builders in planning affordable housing, while also supporting not-for-profit builders in overcoming information barriers that rural communities often face. But now let's move on to talking about the Wellbeing Dashboard. The Rural Community Wellbeing Dashboard is a new tool that was developed by ROI and launched in September of last year. Our team's objectives were to improve access to information and provide evidence for rural decision-making so that we can empower people to tell stories about what's happening in their communities in a standardized way that could be applied all across Canada. And we were successful in building a foundation that provides data and indicators via a user-friendly, interactive, digital dashboard that is supported by local, regional, and national data sources such as Statistics Canada. So with this, we're mobilizing knowledge and building capacity for rural communities to use our dashboard tool. And we're also testing the CSA standards that Paul touched on, which were used as the foundation for our dashboard. Of course, we also want to acknowledge our partners which made this project possible. So we are very grateful for the funding put towards the dashboard from the Ontario Trillium Foundation, the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food, Agribusiness and Rural Affairs, York University's Ecological Footprint Initiative, the Rural Ontario Municipal Association, and Eco-Canada. And we're also working right now with the Trillium Foundation to create a French version of the dashboard, so keep an eye out for that. But thank you so much to our partners. So the purpose of the dashboard is to translate data into understanding. This is to further establish baselines, identify issues and priorities for change, and also to create linkages for communities who may be experiencing similar challenges or opportunities. The data that's collected can be transformed into actionable policies, programs, and initiatives. And some examples of these potential uses are the ability to develop, review, or revise plans for community safety and well-being. It can also be used to support and develop business cases for funding applications, which we understand are becoming increasingly competitive. And it can also be the initial step in data gathering for reporting or briefing purposes. The dashboard can also be a starting point for focusing investment for further research or data collection as well. And we are working right now with Cape Breton University to duplicate the dashboard, and we hope to roll that out soon. We also worked with a group of focus volunteers, which helped to ensure that the dashboard was relevant, useful, and user-friendly. These focus groups also helped to identify data sources, validated our indicators, and developed use cases to raise awareness about this particular project. So listed below are those data champions, and we want to thank them for their input and their work towards the growth of this tool. All right, but now let's move on to the demonstration portion of the dashboard. So if you'd like to follow along, you can go to this web address. We've also put that in the chat as well, so you can copy and post that into your browser. You'll be able to see the wellbeing dashboard. So let me stop sharing for a moment as I switch over to our website. Just a moment, bear with me here. All right, hopefully now you're able to see our landing page. So if you want to access the dashboard, you can first go to the Rural Ontario Institute's webpage. So this is the landing page that you'll see here. And at the top, we have our right-hand menu. So the first thing that I want to point out is the RHIS. Again, that stands for our Rural Housing Information System. So I encourage you to check that out. It has really useful information related to housing and demographics in Ontario. And right now we actually have a promotion going where if you sign up for the RHIS, you get the first 3 months of usage for free, where you'll have access to things like rent prices, permit data, zoning information, etc. So definitely check that out. I'll also point out the well-being here. So if you click on that, you'll be brought to our well-being homepage. So you can see on the left-hand side of this homepage, we have a list of links. As you navigate through, sometimes this list will disappear, so you can always navigate back to the top. All of those are reflected in our drop-down, and we also have a pop-up menu for the dashboard itself, which will take you to the categories of the dashboard, so you can click and access those here. We also do have a survey as well. So if you are using the dashboard, we really appreciate your feedback afterwards. It's a short survey, takes 2 or 3 minutes. It's only 4 questions, and we do use that feedback to help improve this tool. So any feedback that we can get from you is highly appreciated. So while we're here, I'll just point out a few things in our list of links. So if you're interested in learning more about the dashboard tool and how it was developed, you can click on Help and Resources. You can also click on Meet the Team and Project Partners to learn more about the people who worked on this project and funded it to make it possible. Above that, we also have our well-being fact sheets. So these essentially provide a summary of the context of data from the rural well-being dashboard. So it does a comparison of our rural versus our urban context. So you can actually click on that there and get some more information in kind of a snapshot. And above that, we have a download data page. So if you'd like to have access to our cleaned up Excel files, which have the data that was used to create the dashboard, you can click on that there. And we have more information related to the indicators that Paul talked about in our list and our definition section. And then finally, above that, you can also click on Request a Report. So we are actually partnering with different organizations right now to create customized reports. So if you'd like, we can partner with you to make a report specific to data that you're interested in having access to. So you can click there and we'd be more than happy to talk to you. So reach out to us if you're interested in having a report made for your community or organization. But now we'll finally move on to the demonstration portion. So again, you can click here on the list for the dashboard, or you can navigate back to the top to our drop-down menu. So first I'll click on highlights, which will bring us to the page at the top. So you'll notice that there is some loading time as we move through the dashboard, and that's because it's hosted in a secondary platform called Tableau. So it is pulling the information from there. The other thing to note is that the dashboard should be viewed on a desktop version. It's not available on your cellular device, so please use a laptop or computer to view the dashboard. So on our highlights page here, we have these 6 key data cards. This page doesn't have every single data point, but it does have those higher level information for you to grasp the key takeaways of each category of the dashboard. So you can click on this to have those key highlights. While we're here, I'd also like to point out a few features that you'll see reflected in each category of the dashboard. So the first thing is that we have this big eye icon, or our information icon. If you hover over that, you'll be able to see all the definitions that were used on this particular page. So for example, you can see those lists here. Or if you go to the data cards, you'll also see the specific definitions for that data card. On the left-hand side, we have our filters menu. So you'll see this throughout every page where you can actually filter what you're seeing by the region, community, or community type. For example, if I click on region, you'll notice that the default is that all of the regions are selected. So right now we're actually seeing all of the information for all of those regions in Ontario. If you'd like to specifically filter by your own, you can just go to the top and deselect all, and you'll notice that all of those boxes are no longer selected. And then you can specifically click on whichever one you're interested in seeing. So for example, I grew up in Haldimand, Norfolk County, so I could click on that one and say apply. And you'll notice here, for example, that in 2021, 24% of households were in unaffordable housing for all of Ontario. But once that gets updated to my specific region, you'll see that that number changes. So now it's 16% of households in Haldimand, Norfolk are in unaffordable housing. If you continue past our key data cards, we also have some more links here. So we have definitions, resources, and download data. If you click on those, it'll bring you back to the Wellbeing homepage where we'll have more information for you about each of those sections. If you're someone who maybe prefers a table version versus having a visualization, you can always go down below our graphs, and we also have table versions here. And these are customizable, so you can actually interact excuse me, you can interact with the tables. So I can change the layout, for example. I can specifically highlight one column or row, or even a single data point if I'd like. And if I continue past those, at the bottom here, you'll see some other features. I'll direct you to this button here, which says choose a format to download. So if you click on this button, you'll notice that there's three options that pop up. We have image, PDF, or PowerPoint. So if I were to click on one of those, it would download in that specific version the entire page that I'm viewing. So for example, if I clicked image, this is what it pops up as. So you can see here the entire web page that we were just looking at. So you could use this, for example, to present an infographic to your team with those key data points or specific information from the page that you're looking at if you'd like. Okay, we'll move next to our demographics category. So we started with highlights, now we're moving on to the more specific categories within the dashboard. So this one here is a similar layout as you'll notice. Instead of the key data cards, we do have our geographical map here. And also in the filters menu, I'll point out that on these specific pages, you also have the option to select a specific indicator from that category. So for example, in demographics, if I wanted to see the young adult population, I could click there and it would update the map. You can again also specifically select a region, community, or community type, and it will change on the map for you. You'll also notice on these pages that we have some extra tabs here as well. So for example, if I click on population, this will give me more specific information related to that topic. So you can see here when we click on those next tabs, we have a summary at the top, which explains what this page is about. We also have that information icon popping up again, where you can see all of the definitions that are being used here. We have some more key data cards, and on those, we also have the source of where the information is coming from. And then below, some more graphs. Again, these are all customizable, so you can click on those. We have the tables just down below. So here you can see, for example, the population change from 2016 to 2021. If I click on the next tab for age, you can also see more information here. For example, the median age, or the youth or senior population. Moving next, if I want to go to our next category, again, I can go to the drop-down menu. So we went from highlights to demographics, and now we'll click on economics. So that's what this page looks like. So here we have information provided from the Ministry of Agriculture's Analyst Data Tool, from Statistics Canada, Living Wage, etc. So you can find a lot of great information here. For example, if I click on income, you can see here the median individual income versus the medium household income, or households in a low income. And for example, if I want to look at the distribution of low income individuals by age group, that's also available on this page. Moving back to the top, I can click on employment. So here, for example, I can see the top 5 industries. Again, this is for all of Ontario until I specifically select one particular region. So you'll notice in this case, the top job industry in the province is healthcare and social assistance. And I can, again, click on that specific point in the graph. This one also has a filter option here where I can filter by the job industry. For example, if I'm interested in educational services, I can say apply. A moment, apply, there we go. And so you can see how that's reflected in the graph. And then again, we have information like our average industry wage that was provided by the analyst tool. And moving on to our next tab, internet. We actually just released a fact sheet related to internet. So if you're interested in learning more about that one, you can go back to that wellbeing homepage and click on the wellbeing fact sheet section. So here for internet, we know in some rural communities, they still struggle with internet speeds or internet access. So you can find more information here about those from our Ontario Broadband Resource Hub. And this could be used, for example, by internet companies to better understand what areas they need to provide service to, or where they could improve their services in general. So this is a great area to check for that. All right, moving on to our next category, and I am going a little fast just for the sake of time, but we will have time at the end for questions if you have any, and you can put those in the chat. So next we'll move on to housing. So as I mentioned before, we have the Rural Housing Information System, and that has specific information such as rental prices in larger urban centers in Ontario, for example. But the Wellbeing Dashboard is really focused on providing the rural context for comparison, where you can see, for example, the percentage of unaffordable housing or how many properties are owned versus rented. So this type of information can really be used in conjunction with our RHIS. And that will help you to better understand current housing issues or needs, as well as how income affects affordability, for example. So you can see on our map here that this indicator that is the default, if it loads in a moment, is the percentage of unaffordable housing. You can also click on core housing need to find some more information about that. For example, the unaffordable versus unsuitable and inadequate housing. And again, if you're unclear of what those terms mean, no problem, just go on the information icon and you can see here what the definitions of each of those are. On our households tab, you can see information such as the average household size, including how many people live in the household, so one person versus couples with children. And you can also see how many are owned versus rented. And then finally on the dwellings page, we also have information such as the dwellings occupied by usual residents and our costs of shelters for owned or rented. Okay, our next category here will be health. So again, I can navigate to the top, click on that one, and it'll bring me to this page. So this has information provided from the Ministry of Health. And here, for example, we can see the wait time for long care facilities. Again, we'll give it a moment to load. That happens as you navigate through, just because it is pulling information from that secondary Tableau platform. So yes, again, we have the wait time for long care days. You can click on access to health services. So for example, my brother lives in Bruce County, so I could deselect and say Bruce as my option and filter by that one and say apply. And you can see here how those numbers changed, where the majority of the health facilities are pharmacies in this case. They do have a few hospitals on site as well, and some senior active living centers. If I want to learn more about long-term care, I can click on this tab. Here, for example, if you live in an area where there is a lot of senior citizens, you can see how many spaces are available in long-term care, as well as the wait time to get into those facilities. And this was provided by the Ontario Long-Term Care Association. And then our final tab for health is the mental health tab. So here you can see, for example, the most common reasons for calling, and this is provided by ConX Ontario, where again, we can specifically click on one option in the graph. You can see the changes in calls for mental health services over time, and also the number of mental health and addiction facilities that was provided by the Ministry of Health. So this could be used, for example, by mental health providers to better understand what kind of services they need or what specific areas within Ontario are needing more services. So this could be interesting for healthcare providers to use. Moving on to our society tab. So here, if you're interested in learning more, for example, about how many people in the province have a knowledge of French, I actually just moved back to Ontario from Montreal. I was there studying for my PhD, so I'd like to consider myself someone who has a little bit of a knowledge of French. You can see, for example, that indicator on the map here. Again, I can always change to something else. If I'm interested, for example, in the immigration population, I can click on that indicator and see how it changes the map here. If I go to the top and click on population diversity, you'll see more information about the immigration change over time, as well as racialized and religious and spiritual populations. If you're someone who dabbles in the arts like me, you can click on arts and culture. So here, for example, you can see that in Ontario, we have a lot of libraries. You can also look at the revenue and the number of charitable arts organizations. So we have a lot for music and sound, for example. And then on the last tab, we also have information related to education. So for example, you can see how many people have a high school diploma and a breakdown of those levels of education. So for example, a lot of people have a bachelor's degree or higher. And you can also see the major fields of study. So you'll notice the top one in Ontario is business management and public administration. But if you remember back to economics, when I was showing you the top 5 job industries, the top one was health-related services. So here we'll notice that health is a little bit lower down in terms of how many people are studying that. So maybe potentially universities, colleges that have those programs available could use this to better understand where they can open more spots or try to encourage more students to undergo these fields in order to meet the demand in those job industries. All right, and on to our last category, which is environment. So this is a really interesting page. It has information such as your ecological footprint, conservation, climate change, etc. So we'll show you those in just a moment as this loads here. So if I click on ecological footprint, this tab was made in partnership with York University's Ecological Footprint Initiative. So essentially they conducted a study which was to measure how much nature, so things like wetlands, forests, etc., are used by different people in Ontario, and that's what they call the ecological footprint, versus how much nature is actually available to support that use. So that's the biocapacity. This is really interesting because it can help individual communities to understand if they're living within their natural means or if they're using more resources than their environment can actually sustain. So we recently partnered with Huron County to create a customized report for them based on their environmental data. And they were using that as a baseline to identify ways that they could reduce, respond to, or recover from impacts of climate change, for example. If we move on to conservation, you can also see here, for example, the total area that is protected, and this was provided by the Ontario GeoHub and the Canadian Protected and Conserved Areas database. So you can see here, for example, that there are a lot of provincially protected areas. And again, I can highlight on the graph if I'd like to. Moving on to climate change. So this was created using historical weather data changes. So you can see in our graphics here, you can look at the change in the growing season length, and this is the prediction for 2041 to 2070. For this graphic, I can also change, for example, the filter here, put it to length of winter season, where you can see that in the future, we're predicting that our winters will be much shorter. And then finally, we have a tab for commuting. And we also just released a fact sheet about commuting. So again, you can go to the Wellbeing homepage and check that out. But here is where you can see information such as how people are getting to work. So are they commuting by car, truck, van? That's the most common way. They also have a few people doing public transit. So this could also be used by municipalities to better understand maybe where they can improve their public transit or where it's more needed. And also you can look at the duration of the commute. So you'll notice that most people are driving 15 to 29 minutes. Again, that is pretty common for the nature of living in a rural area where you are often driving to their bigger cities to work. So this could also just give you information about the footprint or the impact of commuting. All right, so that is it for the dashboard demonstration. I'll jump back into the presentation part here. Just give me a moment. And I'll talk about how we can apply these indicators. All right, hopefully you're seeing my screen again. So effectively applying these indicators to your work is really the main purpose of the Rural Community Wellbeing Dashboard. This tool can be used in a variety of different ways to support vital signs reports, spotlight reports, etc. And for example, the Temiskaming Health Unit recently used our Spotlight report to tell a focus story about important topics like their social determinants of health and their economic development. So this tool can really be used to tailor information into a project that can shape how data-driven decisions are discussed or navigated, especially in communities where they have issues with capacity or staffing. This dashboard can really streamline your process and provide information that you might take time searching for on your own. And really, we're using this to make data-driven decisions to learn about issues related to different topics like the pandemic or other factors impacting development of rural places. And indicators can be used to determine what worked well, it can be used to make adjustments, or even to celebrate your success, all while curating new ways to adapt to our current circumstances. So gathering information on the dashboard can establish our baselines, identify key issues or questions, and also contextualize the condition of our local communities, even measuring our progress over time. So in order to take action in communities, the dashboard will assist in assessing your needs, providing insight on the development of a business case, for example, and it can also be used in designing programs and initiatives in rural communities. That is it for the dashboard. Just a reminder, if you have a chance to play around with it, please fill out our survey after. We really appreciate any feedback that you have, and it's a short survey. It shouldn't take you more than a few minutes to do. So thank you all so much for attending our webinar. I have some links here for our RHIS and the Wellbeing Dashboard on the screen. You can also contact myself or our Data Programs Manager, Kezia, for any further information, such as making a customized report, or if you'd like access to the raw data files that were used to create the dashboard. So thank you so much, and we'll open the floor now to questions.
You can add your questions in the chat, and maybe I'll just recap some that were posted in the chat while Jasmine was presenting. Someone was asking about the download for Excel files from our data. And as Jasmine touched on at the beginning, the data downloads are available on ROI's website. They are the cleaned up versions of the data, some of the data that is featured on the dashboard. If you're interested in additional data that is featured in the contextual, subparts of the dashboard, you're welcome to contact us and speak to us about those. Another comment that was made was in regards to the data updates. So that data is available on our website's tab called Indicators. So it tells you a little bit more about the indicators that we're using, and it also shows a calendar of posted updates. We are seeking to update the data on an annual basis, and ideally to add new data points that we haven't already included in the system. But in some instances, it's finding the data or making the data available and the time that is required to do that. And one of our top priorities over the next 6 months and year will be the translation of the system into dual languages. But you're welcome to contact us about that if you do have any rural data updates sources that we could be featuring on the dashboard as well. And then I also saw in the chat that someone made a comment about that they were from another province. This is a really great Ontario specific example about what you could do with the rural standards that the CSA group has developed, but it could be applied across rural Canada as well. So if you're interested in collaborating outside of the province, please feel free to reach out to us. A number of us across the country are discussing about how we could utilize the work that we have done and see that for the rest of rural Canada as well. So the conversation has certainly already started because there is that need in the greater country as well. I'm just seeing a message here. I think someone has a question, and I'm not sure, James, if you're able to actually turn on your mic and speak, but if you'd like to put it in the chat. And a couple folks are commenting in the chat that there's some other organizations that are working on this initiative as well. So the maps, someone is asking how granular they are. You can, when you do filter on the map view of the dashboards, you are then able to just see that particular location, but they are certainly not as detailed like as an ArcGIS map that you could see specific streets or anything like that for that particular community. And we are using the municipal boundaries that are shown on that map. There's certainly been conversations from other sectors that would like to see customized boundaries for their regions, whether that's community future offices, health units. I believe the workforce planning boards also have their own boundaries as well. So in discussions about how we can interchangeably change the boundaries to show the data as well. I'm just trying to read through some of the questions here too.
Kezia, James put their question in the chat, and it's just about plans to integrate private data from businesses. So if you maybe want to touch upon, I did mention some of the sources of where the information is coming from, but if you want to touch a little bit more on that.
Yeah, we certainly, we'd have to look at whatever data sources that we would be considering including to make sure that they meet our requirements to be included. You know, one of ours is to make sure that we have data for all the municipalities of Ontario. Jasmine touched on that you can see urban and rural, which is a really nice aspect of this tool, is that you can look at all the urban data in comparison to our rural municipalities as well, so that we do have all the municipalities of Ontario's data on this system. So it's really dependent on what the data source is and the quality of that data source as to whether or not we could include it. But we could plan to discuss that and schedule it for future updates.
And adding on to that, challenges with obtaining data. I don't know if you want to mention that too. Someone's asking what challenges do we have in obtaining the data? What other areas do we want to develop in the dashboard?
I think that just the challenges that we probably all face is that the lack of data being available, and that it is already standardized, that it could be used in a dashboard like this. We've seen we're working in collaboration with Nova Scotia in developing their wellbeing dashboard, and the available data is very limited. So even to create the dashboard that we currently have with the data that's featured, it's challenging for them to get that information. So some of this is very specific to Ontario, and you might find those challenges in developing this for your province, that there would be those data gaps as well. So yeah, we try to work with nonprofits that we know that are out there, or provincial departments, to collect this data. And in some instances, like the example that Jasmine was sharing about the York University's ecological footprint work that they have undertaken, that there might be proxy data that we are evolving that data and information. So the York University had developed that research at the international level and had downloaded it to the national level. And then we took their data and made it available for Ontario and all the communities of Ontario. So sometimes it certainly, if we are exploring new data, it takes a considerable investment of time of evolving it to make it accessible for all of our municipalities. But that would be certainly on a case-by-case basis, and whether or not we've got the capacity to do that as well. Are you seeing any other questions in the chat there, Jasmine, that I've missed?
It seems like we've got all of them answered in some form or another. Someone was just asking about the report that we did for Huron County. So we do have that on the website, as well as an example of what a customized report looks like for Timiskaming's health unit. So if you go again back to the Rural Ontario Institute, go to the Wellbeing homepage, on the request a report section, I didn't have a chance to show that, but we do have the example there of what that looks like. So you can see, for example, what kind of information could be included in those reports.
And we will work to include any new use cases or resources that come available of user groups using our data from the Wellbeing Dashboard, that we will publish them on ROI's site as well, so that you can see those working examples about how people are using our information.
All right, any other questions before we let everyone go? Please put those in the chat if you have them.
Do you want to put up our contact information again, Jasmine? You're welcome to reach out to us, start the conversation. You know, we'd love to work with you and collaborate, and ideally, please navigate towards the Wellbeing tool and take a look and see all the resources that are already available for you there. And thank you again, Paul, for joining us today to share about the CSA group.